The sun was shining bright over the lake that afternoon. The air was warm, and the sound of birds mixed with the gentle splash of water against the shore. Families in the neighborhood were out and about, enjoying the kind of day that made everyone want to be outside. By the lake stood the community pool, a place many neighbors used to cool off during summer. It wasn't a huge pool, but it was well kept and had plenty of space for families to relax. On that day, it felt perfect. A couple had brought their 2 kids to the pool. The children were excited, running ahead with towels wrapped around their shoulders, laughing the way kids do when they know they're about to have fun. Their parents followed behind, carrying a small cooler with drinks and snacks. The kids had been looking forward to swimming all week, especially since school had been keeping them busy. Today was about family, relaxation, and enjoying the water. The pool itself was quiet when they arrived. Only a few people were sitting in the shaded chairs nearby. The kids wasted no time, dropping their towels on the chairs and jumping into the water with big splashes. Their laughter filled the air, bouncing across the lake in the background. The parents sat back in the lounge chairs watching them play, occasionally reminding them not to splash too much or to stay closer to the shallow side. It was a normal, happy afternoon. For a while, everything was peaceful. The children played games in the water, pretending to be sea creatures, diving down to touch the tiles at the bottom and racing each other from one side of the pool to the other. Their parents sat nearby, chatting quietly, sipping cold drinks and enjoying the rare chance to relax in the middle of the weekend. But peace in the neighborhood didn't always last long. There was one person who had a reputation for turning simple afternoons into arguments. She was a neighbor who often watched everything around the lake, as though it was her responsibility to keep order. People in the community already knew her well. She was quick to comment, quick to complain, and always certain she was right. That afternoon, she showed up at the pool with her teenage son. She walked in with the kind of presence that made people stop what they were doing, as though they could already sense something was about to happen. Her son trailed behind her, looking a little uneasy, as though he wasn't as eager to be there as she was. He carried a towel and goggles, but his posture showed he would rather be anywhere else. As soon as she saw the children in the water, her face tightened. She stood near the entrance of the pool area, looking around as if checking to see who was present. Then she put her hands on her hips and stared at the family. Her son shifted uncomfortably, glancing at the water but avoiding eye contact with the kids who were happily swimming. The parents noticed her presence, but at first, they didn't think much of it. After all, it was a shared pool and anyone could use it. They smiled politely in her direction, assuming she would take a chair and let her son swim as well. But instead of settling down, she walked directly toward them. The woman stopped just a few feet away from the parents. Her voice was sharp when she spoke, and it carried across the pool. She said the kids should not be in the water right then. Her reasoning was strange. She claimed her son had been waiting all week to swim, and it wasn't fair that he had to share the pool with other children who were already playing. She insisted that they should have the pool to themselves for a while. The parents were taken aback. At first, they thought they had misunderstood. Surely she couldn't mean that their kids should leave just because her son wanted to swim. The father leaned forward, trying to keep his tone calm, and explained that it was the community pool. Everyone who paid their dues had the same right to use it. There was no rule about giving it up for someone else's personal turn. But the woman wasn't satisfied with that answer. Her voice grew louder, and she waved her hand toward the kids who had now stopped playing and were clinging to the edge of the pool, watching with wide eyes. She said the pool was too crowded, even though only 2 children were swimming. She argued that they were splashing too much, making it uncomfortable for others to enjoy the water. Her son still hadn't stepped into the pool. He stood there quietly, staring at the ground, clearly wishing his mother would stop making a scene. The parents tried to explain again, this time more firmly, that their kids had every right to be there. The father said they weren't going to leave, and the mother added that the kids weren't bothering anyone. Other neighbors sitting nearby looked over but didn't interfere. They had seen this sort of thing before and seemed to expect it. The tension was rising. The kids whispered to each other, unsure if they should keep swimming. The parents reassured them softly, telling them to stay in the water and enjoy themselves. But the mood had shifted. What was supposed to be a lighthearted afternoon now carried the weight of an unnecessary conflict. The woman didn't back down. She crossed her arms, glaring at the family. and repeated that her son should be the one swimming because he needed the exercise and had been looking forward to it. The parents didn't move. They sat together, calm but firm, unwilling to give in to such an unreasonable demand. The father finally leaned back in his chair, as if signaling that the conversation was over. But the woman didn't leave. She lingered, muttering to herself, clearly preparing to take the situation further. Her son finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper, asking if he could just swim anyway, but she ignored him. Her focus remained on the parents and their kids as though she needed to prove she had authority. The children, still holding on to the pool's edge, exchanged nervous glances, sensing that this wasn't over yet. The peaceful afternoon by the lake was no longer peaceful. What had begun as laughter and splashing had turned into a standoff, with the family determined to stand their ground and the neighbor unwilling to accept it. The air seemed heavier now, filled with the tension of what might come next. The woman didn't leave. She stood near the pool with her arms crossed, her eyes fixed on the family as though she was waiting for them to give in. The children tried to keep playing, but their splashes were smaller now, and their laughter had turned nervous. They looked back at their parents often, searching for reassurance. Their parents kept nodding and smiling, trying to show the kids that everything was fine, though deep down they knew the situation was becoming uncomfortable. The woman's son still hadn't entered the pool. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, holding his towel against his chest. He looked embarrassed, like he wanted to disappear. He glanced at the kids in the water but didn't say anything. Every now and then, he would mutter quietly to his mother, but she brushed him off, too focused on her anger. She seemed determined to make the afternoon about her authority. Finally, she spoke again, this time louder than before. She told the parents that their children were disturbing everyone else. Her words carried across the pool area, even though there weren't many people there to disturb. The few neighbors sitting nearby turned their heads, watching more closely now. Some of them looked tired, like they had seen her act this way too many times before. A couple shook their heads quietly, but no one stepped in. The father sat up in his chair, calm but steady. He told her again that the pool belonged to the community, and that his children had every right to be there. He reminded her that their family, like hers, paid the same HOA fees that kept the pool open. The mother added that the kids were not breaking any rules. They weren't running, they weren't shouting too loudly, and they weren't leaving a mess. They were just children playing in the water on a warm day. The woman wasn't satisfied. Her face tightened and she raised her voice again. She said the pool was not a playground and that her son needed peace and quiet to swim properly. She accused the children of splashing too much and even claimed they were being reckless, though they weren't. Her words didn't match reality, but she spoke them with confidence as though repeating them might make them true. The kids, hearing themselves described as a problem, looked uneasy. The little boy held onto the side of the pool and asked softly if they should get out. The mother shook her head, speaking gently, reminding them that they had done nothing wrong. She told them to keep enjoying themselves. Her voice was calm, but inside she felt a mix of anger and worry. It wasn't easy to stay composed when someone was pointing at her children and speaking so harshly. The tension grew heavier. The woman planted herself near the water, blocking part of the walkway as if her presence alone might intimidate the family into leaving. Her son kept tugging on his towel, avoiding eye contact with everyone. He looked younger in that moment, smaller somehow, as though he wanted to sink into the background and pretend he wasn't part of it. The father, unwilling to fuel the fire, leaned back again in his chair and put on his sunglasses. His silence seemed to irritate the woman even more. She wanted a reaction. She wanted them to argue so she could prove herself right. But instead she got a calm refusal to bend to her demand. The more composed the parents were, the more agitated she became. Minutes passed, but they felt much longer. The kids tried to resume their game, splashing gently and racing each other to the middle of the pool. But the energy was different now. Their giggles were softer, their movements hesitant. Every time they looked up, they saw the woman still standing there, watching them with narrowed eyes. Finally, she raised her voice again, this time addressing not just the parents, but everyone within earshot. She declared that the pool rules were being ignored, that the children were disruptive, and that it wasn't safe for her son to swim with them there. Her words echoed through the air, catching the attention of the neighbors who had been quietly observing. Some exchanged glances, rolling their eyes. They knew the children weren't causing trouble. They knew exactly what was happening. The father finally responded, speaking louder now so others could hear. He said that if anyone believed his children were breaking the rules, they could check the posted sign near the entrance. He pointed toward it, reminding everyone that the guidelines were clear. Nowhere did it say that one family could take over the pool or demand others leave for personal reasons. His words were calm, steady, and backed with reason. The woman didn't back down. She accused him of twisting the rules and insisted that as a longtime resident, she knew better than anyone else how things should work. She kept repeating that her son had been looking forward to swimming all week, and it was unfair that he couldn't enjoy it because the pool was taken over. Her son finally spoke again, barely audible, asking if he could just get in, but she snapped at him, telling him to wait. She wasn't about to let him swim while her argument was still unfolding. He looked down again, his face red with embarrassment. He wanted to swim, yes, but not like this. Not with everyone staring at them, not with his mother shouting on his behalf. By now, the whole pool area was uncomfortable. The air that had once been filled with laughter and relaxation was heavy with tension. Some neighbors quietly packed up their things and left, not wanting to get pulled into the drama. Others stayed, their curiosity stronger than their discomfort, waiting to see how the standoff would end. The mother of the children took out her phone. She didn't use it yet, but she held it in her hand, a quiet signal that she wasn't afraid to record what was happening if it continued. The woman noticed, and her expression shifted slightly. Still, she didn't stop. She seemed to think she could talk her way into control, even as evidence mounted against her behavior. The father told the children once more to keep enjoying themselves, his tone steady, his body language relaxed. He wasn't going to let them feel like they had to leave their own community pool. But he also knew this wasn't over. He could see it in the way the woman lingered, the way her voice kept rising, the way her son looked trapped between wanting to swim and wanting to disappear. It was clear she wasn't going to walk away. She was building toward something, her frustration bubbling higher with every passing minute. The parents exchanged a glance, silent but understanding. They both knew this wasn't just about swimming anymore. It was about control, about someone who couldn't accept being told no. The kids splashed softly, their eyes darting between their parents and the woman on the side of the pool. They were trying to pretend everything was fine, but they could feel the weight of the situation. They could feel the way everyone was watching, waiting for the next move. And then, as if reaching a breaking point, the woman pulled out her phone. She held it up, pressing buttons with quick, sharp movements. The parents could see immediately what she was doing. She wasn't texting a friend. She wasn't looking at the time. She was dialing a number with purpose, her face set in determination. Her voice was low at first, then louder, carrying across the pool once again. The parents watched, calm on the outside but tense within. The neighbors leaned in slightly, listening, their expressions shifting from curiosity to disbelief. The children stopped swimming altogether, clinging to the edge of the pool, their eyes wide. The woman had called 911. The phone was against her ear and her voice carried across the pool. Everyone nearby could hear her as she spoke. She told the emergency operator that there were children in the pool who didn't belong there, that they were causing trouble, and that she needed officers to come immediately. Her words were dramatic, painted in a way that made it sound like something dangerous was happening. But those sitting around knew the truth. It was just two children swimming happily on a warm afternoon. The children froze when they realized what she was saying. They clung to the side of the pool, looking back at their parents with nervous eyes. Their father kept his expression steady, though inside he was frustrated that it had come to this. Their mother leaned toward them and whispered gently that they didn't do anything wrong, that everything was going to be okay. Her calm voice soothed them a little, but the kids couldn't help feeling uneasy. They had never been in a situation where someone called the police on them for simply swimming. The neighbors nearby exchanged whispers. Some shook their heads, clearly tired of this woman's behavior. Others sat back, waiting, curious to see how things would unfold. Everyone knew that calling 911 for something so small was extreme, but the woman seemed convinced she was in the right. When she hung up, she tucked the phone under her arm and looked proud of herself. She declared loudly that officers would be arriving soon and that the family should prepare to explain themselves. She spoke as though she had already won, as though her decision to involve the authorities meant she had the upper hand. Her son still hadn't stepped into the water. He sat on the edge of a chair, his towel wrapped around him tightly. He avoided everyone's eyes, his embarrassment written across his face. The parents of the children remained calm. They didn't want to add fuel to the fire, and they certainly didn't want their kids to feel more scared than they already were. The father leaned forward, resting his arms on his knees, and told his children again that everything would be fine. He explained in a quiet voice that the police would come, they would see what was happening, and they would understand that the family had done nothing wrong. Minutes felt like hours as everyone waited. The kids no longer played in the water. Instead, they floated close to the wall, watching nervously. Their mother sat with her phone still in her hand, ready to record if needed. She wasn't trying to provoke anything, but she knew having proof of what was said and done might matter later. The woman, on the other hand, paced back and forth near the entrance. She looked down the path toward the road, waiting for the police cars to appear. Every so often she muttered something about rules and respect, as though she was rehearsing her side of the story. Her son sat quietly, his shoulders slumped. He didn't share her excitement for what was about to happen. If anything, he seemed to wish the ground would swallow him whole. Finally, the sound of car tires crunching against the gravel broke the stillness. Two officers walked toward the pool area. They looked calm and professional, their eyes scanning the scene as they approached. The woman immediately rushed toward them, waving her arms, her words spilling out in a rush. She pointed at the children in the pool, raising her voice as she repeated her complaints. She claimed the kids were out of control, that they refused to leave when asked, and that they were disturbing the peace. The officers listened politely, their faces neutral. They didn't interrupt, but they didn't look alarmed either. Once she finished, one of them asked her to step aside for a moment while they spoke with the family. She looked annoyed at being brushed off so quickly, but she obeyed, folding her arms tightly and glaring at the parents as if daring them to contradict her. The officers walked over to the lounge chairs where the parents were sitting. The father stood and greeted them calmly. He explained in a steady voice that this was the community pool, open to all residents. He said that his children were simply swimming and hadn't broken any rules. The mother then added that the woman had demanded they leave so her son could swim alone, and when they refused, she escalated the situation by calling 911. Her tone was calm, but her eyes showed her frustration at the absurdity of it all. One officer asked if they had any proof of what had been said. The mother held up her phone and showed them the recording she had taken. The video played clearly, the woman yelling, demanding the children leave, and insisting her son had priority. The officers watched closely, nodding as the truth unfolded in front of them. There was no disruption, no danger, nothing that required their intervention. While this happened, the kids clung to the side of the pool, watching the officers nervously. They weren't used to seeing police up close, especially not because of something they had been accused of. Their father turned to them and gave a small smile, mouthing the words, "It's okay." Slowly, they relaxed a little, though their eyes never left the scene. Once the officers had the full picture, they turned back to the woman. They asked her to explain again what rule had been broken. She repeated her story, insisting that the pool was too crowded and that her son couldn't enjoy it with other children there. The officers exchanged a glance, then explained gently but firmly that the pool was for everyone. They said the family had done nothing wrong and had every right to be there. The woman's face turned red. She raised her voice, accusing the officers of not taking her seriously. She insisted that as a longtime resident, she knew what was best for the community. But the officers didn't waver. They reminded her that 911 was for emergencies, not personal disagreements. They warned her that misusing emergency services could have consequences. Her son sat lower in his chair, covering part of his face with his towel. He couldn't bring himself to look at the officers, the family, or anyone else. His mother's words seemed to bounce off him, but his shame was clear. He hadn't asked for any of this. He just wanted to swim. The officers finished their explanation, making it clear that the family could stay as long as they wanted. They spoke kindly to the children, telling them they had done nothing wrong. Then they looked back at the woman one last time, reminding her that the pool was not her personal property. Their message was clear. She needed to let it go. The woman didn't respond right away. She stood frozen, her arms still crossed, her jaw tight. The silence stretched uncomfortably, broken only by the soft ripples of water in the pool. Finally, she muttered something under her breath and turned away. She grabbed her son's arm, pulling him up from the chair, and marched toward the exit without another word. The boy stumbled behind her, his eyes flicking once toward the children in the pool before he lowered his head again. It wasn't anger in his expression, it was something closer to regret. Then he was gone, following his mother out of the pool area. The officers stayed a few minutes longer, chatting with the parents and making sure everything was settled. They reminded the family that they had done nothing wrong and encouraged them to enjoy the rest of their day. The parents thanked them for their time, grateful for the calm and fair way they had handled the situation. As the officers walked back toward their cars, the neighbors who had stayed behind slowly began to relax. Some even came over to the parents, shaking their heads and offering quiet words of support. They shared their own stories about similar encounters, about how the woman had a history of making scenes over small things. It was a relief to know they weren't alone, that others saw what had happened and understood the truth. The children, still clinging to the pool wall, finally asked if it was safe to keep swimming. Their mother smiled and nodded, telling them everything was fine now. Their father encouraged them to go back to their games, to enjoy the water like they had before. Slowly their laughter returned, filling the air once again. The tension of the afternoon began to fade, replaced by the sound of splashes and giggles. The woman might have left in anger, but the family remained. They had stood their ground calmly and firmly, and the truth had come out in the end. The lake sparkled in the distance, the sun still shining just as brightly as before. Life around the pool returned to normal, but the memory of what had just happened lingered in the minds of everyone who witnessed it. For the children, it was a lesson they would never forget. They learned that sometimes people will try to push you out, even when you've done nothing wrong. But they also learned the importance of staying calm, of trusting the truth, and of knowing that fairness can win out in the end. Their parents' steady example had shown them that clearly. And for the neighbors, it was yet another reminder of the kind of drama one person could bring into a peaceful afternoon. But it was also proof that, with patience and clarity, such drama didn't have to win. The police cars had rolled away, and the pool slowly settled back into its calm rhythm. The children's laughter returned, though it was softer at first, like they were testing the waters of normalcy again. Their parents encouraged them to play, reminding them that the officers had already made it clear. They had done nothing wrong. The tension in the air began to fade, but it wasn't gone completely. The memory of what had just happened lingered, especially for the neighbors who had watched it all unfold. The family sat quietly for a while, sipping water from their cooler and sharing small smiles with the children. They were relieved the ordeal had ended without more drama, but they knew this wasn't the last they'd hear of it. In communities like this, stories traveled fast. By tomorrow, nearly everyone around the lake would have heard what happened at the pool. The kids seemed to sense this too. They swam with more caution, looking over at their parents now and then as if checking to see if it was still safe to laugh out loud. Their mother encouraged them with a warm smile, and their father gave a playful wave from his chair, reminding them to enjoy the moment. Slowly, their voices rose again, and soon the sound of splashing and giggling filled the air once more. The pool felt alive again, but the quiet after the storm was only temporary. Within an hour, a few more neighbors wandered over, drawn by the story they had already begun to hear through whispered phone calls and messages. One couple brought their own children, who quickly joined in the pool games. Another neighbor came by without kids, simply to watch and to offer a few kind words to the parents sitting by the chairs. The support was clear. Many people had grown tired of the woman's behavior, and this latest outburst had only made their feelings stronger. The father listened politely as one neighbor explained how the same woman had once tried to stop teenagers from fishing near the lake, claiming they were scaring the ducks. Another recalled how she had yelled at kids for riding their bikes too close to her yard. Everyone seemed to have their own story, and now they felt comfortable sharing them openly. It was as if the 911 call had broken a wall of silence, giving people the courage to speak up. The mother nodded along, grateful for the support, but also weary of the attention. She didn't want her children to feel like they were the center of gossip. She smiled and kept her voice calm, steering conversations back toward lighter topics whenever possible. But it was clear, this incident had struck a nerve in the community, and people weren't going to let it pass quietly. As the sun lowered in the sky, painting the lake in shades of orange and gold, the pool began to empty. Families packed up towels and snacks, Children wrapped themselves in blankets and the sound of laughter faded into the evening air. The parents gathered their things too, guiding their kids gently out of the water. It had been a long day, and though it ended better than it might have, they were ready to go home. That night, the family sat together at their kitchen table. The kids asked questions, their voices small and uncertain. Why had the woman been so angry? Why had she said they didn't belong? Why did the police have to come if they hadn't done anything wrong? Their parents answered as best they could, keeping their tone simple and reassuring. They explained that sometimes people let their frustration get the better of them. Sometimes people think they can control things that don't belong to them, and sometimes the best thing to do is stay calm and let the truth show itself. The children listened, their eyes wide but thoughtful. They seemed to take comfort in the fact that their parents hadn't backed down, that they had been protected and defended. It was a moment of learning, though not the kind that comes from books or school. It was the kind of lesson that sticks, one about fairness, patience, and the value of standing your ground. Meanwhile, the story of what happened spread quickly. By the next morning, the incident was the talk of the neighborhood. Some people had seen the scene with their own eyes. Others had already heard secondhand accounts. Either way, it was clear that most residents weren't pleased. The idea of calling 911 over a pool dispute left many shaking their heads. By the afternoon, a few neighbors stopped by the family's home to offer their support directly. They knocked on the door, carrying plates of cookies or simply standing with folded arms as they expressed their disbelief at what had happened. They told the parents they admired how calmly they had handled the situation. Some even suggested bringing it up at the next HOA meeting. Clearly, this wasn't just about one family anymore, it was about the entire community. The parents accepted the kind words with gratitude. They didn't seek revenge, but they did want fairness. They knew the HOA would eventually hear about it, and they hoped the board would recognize the seriousness of what had happened. Calling the police wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a misuse of emergency services, and it had frightened their children in a way that wasn't fair. Days passed, and the story continued to ripple through the community. Everywhere the family went, to the mailbox, to the walking paths near the lake, even to the grocery store nearby, neighbors stopped to ask about the incident. Some offered sympathy, others offered frustration of their own. Everyone seemed to have something to say. It was exhausting, but it also made the parents feel less alone. They weren't the only ones who had seen the problem for what it was. The children, too, began to relax again. After a few days, they were back in the pool, playing with friends, their laughter ringing through the air without hesitation. Their parents kept a careful eye, but they no longer saw the fear in their children's faces. Instead, they saw resilience, the ability to bounce back even after something unfair had shaken them. But as peaceful as their days became again, the parents couldn't ignore the build-up to the next HOA meeting. They knew it was coming soon, and they knew it wouldn't pass without mention of what had happened. Neighbors had already hinted that many people planned to bring it up, frustrated with how the woman had acted. It seemed the entire community was ready for change. When the evening of the meeting arrived, the family walked into the community center with steady steps. The children stayed home this time, tucked into bed with a babysitter to watch them. The parents entered the crowded room where neighbors filled the seats, their voices buzzing with quiet conversation. The air felt thick, not with tension this time, but with expectation. The board members sat at the front of the room, papers stacked neatly, ready to begin. But before the agenda could even be read, voices rose from the crowd. People wanted to speak. People wanted to address what had happened at the pool. One neighbor stood first, recounting the story in clear words. She described how she had been there, how she had watched the family enjoy the pool peacefully before the argument began. She spoke about the shouting, the demands, and the unnecessary call to the police. Her voice was steady, but her frustration was clear. Another neighbor followed, sharing his own run-ins with the same woman. He described being told he couldn't walk his dog near the lake, even though the paths were open to all. He said he had stayed quiet then, but after seeing what happened to the children, he couldn't stay quiet anymore. The room murmured in agreement, voices rising with support. The parents didn't need to say much. They sat quietly, listening as one neighbor after another stood to speak. It was as though the entire community had been waiting for this moment, waiting for a chance to voice their concerns. The woman's behavior wasn't new, but now it had reached a point no one could ignore. When it was their turn to speak, the father stood and thanked everyone for their support. He explained briefly how frightening it had been for his children, how unnecessary it was to involve the police, and how important it was to protect the community from this kind of misuse of power. His words were simple, but they carried weight. The mother added only a few words, her voice calm but firm, echoing the same sentiment. By the end of the night, it was clear that the board could not ignore the matter. They promised to review the situation and consider appropriate steps. They didn't make immediate decisions, but the message was loud and clear. The community wanted accountability. As the parents walked home together that night, they felt lighter. It wasn't just about their family anymore. It was about standing together as a community, about protecting fairness and peace for everyone. The lake shimmered under the moonlight as they walked the familiar path back to their home. Their children were asleep, safe and unaware of the voices that had risen in their defense. The woman had left her mark on the neighborhood that day, but in doing so, she had united the people around her in a way she hadn't expected. What began as an afternoon of conflict at the pool had grown into something larger, an awakening of voices, a reminder of the strength that comes when people stand together. The story wasn't over yet. There would be more conversations, more decisions, and likely more challenges ahead. But for the family, for the children who had simply wanted to swim, this was enough for now. They had stood their ground, they had been heard, and they knew they weren't alone. The weeks after the meeting moved slowly, but the effects of that evening lingered in the neighborhood. The family went back to their normal routine, school mornings, evening walks by the lake, weekends at the pool, but things felt a little different now. Neighbors smiled more when they saw them, stopping to chat in ways they hadn't before. People waved from porches, asked about the children, or simply offered words of support. It was as if the whole community had quietly agreed to stand together after what had happened. For the children, life slowly returned to normal. At first, they were hesitant to go back to the pool. They remembered too well how it felt when the police arrived, how scary it was to be accused of doing something wrong when they had only been playing. But their parents encouraged them gently, reminding them that the pool belonged to everyone and that no one could take away their right to enjoy it. Bit by bit, the kids found their confidence again. Soon, their laughter filled the air like it had before, splashing water and carefree games echoing across the lake. The parents kept a watchful eye, but they were glad to see their children happy again. They sat on the same lounge chairs, sharing quiet conversations while keeping their phones nearby just in case. But there was no repeat of that day. The pool remained calm, used by families, teenagers, and older residents alike. Everyone seemed more aware now of what had happened, and no one wanted to see it happen again. Meanwhile, the woman who had caused the chaos kept a lower profile. Neighbors whispered about her, but she didn't appear at the pool. Some said she had been spoken to by the HOA board. Others guessed she was simply embarrassed after the attention the incident had brought. Whatever the reason, her presence was missing from the lake for a while, and most people seemed to enjoy the quiet that came with it. When the next HOA meeting rolled around, the community center was even more crowded than before. Word had spread about the changes being discussed. The family attended again, sitting quietly toward the back this time. They didn't need to speak. Their story had already been told. Now it was up to the board to decide what steps to take. The board members spoke carefully, but their decision was clear. They announced that misuse of emergency services would not be tolerated in the community. They explained that residents should respect one another's right to enjoy shared spaces without fear of intimidation or unfair demands. While they didn't mention the woman by name, everyone in the room knew exactly what they were talking about. A quiet murmur of agreement filled the room. The parents listened, their hands folded, relief showing quietly in their eyes. They hadn't wanted revenge, they had only wanted fairness. And now, hearing the rules spoken aloud, they felt reassured that the community was taking the matter seriously. It wasn't just about their family anymore. It was about protecting everyone's right to feel safe in their own neighborhood. After the meeting, several neighbors approached again, shaking hands and offering smiles. Some spoke about the future, about how they wanted the neighborhood to be a place of peace, not arguments. Others simply said thank you, recognizing the patience the family had shown during the ordeal. The parents accepted the kindness with grace, knowing that the real reward was the safety and happiness of their children. Back at home, Life carried on in its simple, steady rhythm. The kids played outside with friends, racing bikes along the paths and chasing one another through the grass. The lake sparkled under the sun, its surface reflecting the colors of each day. The pool, once the scene of conflict, returned to being a place of laughter, splashes, and the smell of sunscreen. It was, once again, what it was meant to be, a space for joy. One afternoon, the children asked if they could invite friends over to swim. Their parents smiled and said yes, happy to see them so full of excitement again. Soon the pool was alive with energy, kids racing, diving, laughing, and sharing snacks on the chairs. Other families joined too, their voices blending together into the warm hum of community. The parents sat nearby, their hearts lighter as they watched the scene unfold. This was how it should be. In the weeks that followed, the woman who had caused the trouble reappeared once or twice, but her behavior was different. She kept her distance, walking her dog along the path or sitting quietly at the far end of the pool with her son. She didn't raise her voice, didn't argue, didn't try to chase anyone away. Maybe she had learned something from the reaction of the community, or maybe she simply realized she couldn't fight everyone at once. Either way, her silence was a welcome change. Her son, who had once sat embarrassed and small under her shadow, looked more at ease when he was on his own. Sometimes he even joined the other kids in the pool, splashing and laughing without his mother watching too closely. The children welcomed him without question, and slowly he seemed to enjoy the space as much as they did. It was proof that sometimes the weight of conflict came not from the children, but from the adults who should have known better. The family's story continued to circulate in small ways. New residents heard about it, sometimes in whispers over backyard fences, sometimes during casual conversations on walks around the lake. It became a kind of reminder, a story people told about fairness, about patience, about standing up calmly when someone tried to push too far. The lesson stretched beyond the pool, shaping how people treated one another in other parts of the neighborhood. For the children, the memory softened over time. What once felt frightening became a story they told with wide eyes and animated hands, explaining to friends how the police came to the pool, but left after realizing there was nothing wrong. They still remembered the fear, but they remembered more strongly the way their parents stood steady, the way the truth had been clear, and the way their neighbors had rallied around them. It was a story that gave them confidence rather than fear. For the parents, the lesson was equally powerful. They had always known the importance of standing firm, but this experience reminded them of the strength that comes from staying calm in the face of unfairness. They had shown their children that kindness didn't mean weakness, and that patience could sometimes be the strongest response of all. Summer rolled into autumn, the leaves around the lake shifting into shades of red and gold. The pool closed for the season, its chairs stacked neatly, its gates locked until the warmth of spring returned.